welcome to this week's edition of the City Update. I'm your host, Mark Aaron, Multimedia Design Manager for the City of Danville. I know recently many of you have seen the news coverage about natural disasters that have been occurring all across our country, from tornadoes in the Midwest that have struck even the South, and even just recently into the Northeast in Massachusetts, which is a rare sighting for tornadoes in such an area of the Northeast. So on today's show, we thought it would be a great time to give you some insight in what you need to do to be prepared in case such a natural disaster could hit right here in the city of Danville. And especially hurricane season is just right around the corner, and I know we're not in danger of a direct hit from a hurricane, but we definitely can see the remnants of a hurricane that may hit the East Coast and make its way up through the city of Danville with strong rains and flooding. So on today's show, we're going to talk with our Director of Emergency Services, Buster Brown, about these two incidents, and also as of this filming on today, we're almost creeping into the triple digits here in the city of Danville, so we want to give you some information on ways to stay safe during the heat in the summer months here in the city of Danville, which can get pretty hot here in the city. So, Buster, thank you so much for taking time to join us today to talk about all these topics.
Thank you for having me. And
Buster, as I mentioned, let's talk a little bit about hurricane season. As I mentioned in my intro, I think that begins on June 1st, and as our citizens who have been living here in the city of Danville for many years know, we don't get a direct hit from a hurricane, but the remnants of hurricanes can cause some major issues here for our citizens.
Yes, actually, you know, we have had hurricanes hit Danville in the past, right. But most of the time what we're going to get is it's going to be downgraded to a tropical storm, which is going to affect us in flooding, high winds, power outages, things like that. But primarily, though, the hurricane itself is usually going to be downgraded by the time it gets this far inland.
Okay. Now, hurricane season, I said, what is hurricane season for our viewers?
Hurricane season starts on June 1st, and it goes into the early part of mid-fall, early to mid-fall. And at the time, most of the hurricanes, they start out in the eastern Atlantic Ocean and come across up through the Caribbean, and we can get them either off the East Coast or we can get them up through the Gulf Stream also.
Okay. And I know when you're watching these storms, you're actually watching upstream from the Dan River, because it's not really a matter of what we get here in the city of Danville. It's other localities that affect us.
Yeah, we have to pay attention to what rain we get here in the city of Danville, but what we get here in the city primarily is going to be affecting localized flooding, the streets, flash flooding, things like that. But where we'd really get the high level of water is what happens really upstream. So that as that water is rising and coming into Danville, that's what's really going to cause a majority of the problems if we're looking at a large spread flood area in the city of Danville.
And with hurricanes, we do get some time to prepare, and that's one of the main reasons why I brought you on today's show, was to give our viewers some information on ways they can prepare. Unlike tornadoes, which we're going to talk about a little later, when you have maybe minutes to prepare, a hurricane, sometimes we have days.
Yeah.
So when it comes to flooding and things of that nature, what do our citizens need to do to be prepared in case remnants of a hurricane does happen to hit?
Well, and really it'd be across the board for all different types of emergencies, but we need to be prepared. You know, one of the things I recommend individuals to do is get a weather radio. You know, weather radios are really good to have. They alert you in an emergency. They give you the warnings, the watches. But also, we have the ability here in the city of Danville to go on with the local television, Comcast, and your television channel, and put out alerts to the residents here that these types of situations are coming. Okay. We also can do what's called reverse 911, where we'd be able to send out a mass message. Now, with the reverse 911, if we have, you know, hours or, you know, a couple days, like you said, in regards to the hurricane remnants, that wouldn't be a problem. Now, for something like a tornado, that would not work, because usually we're talking within just moments or minutes.
Right. Now, the weather radio, how does that work? Is that something I can just buy locally here at an electronics store, put batteries in, and it's ready to go? Do I have to program it? How does that work?
Yeah, you can actually go online. There's different types and different makes and models that you can look in. Yes, you can purchase them here locally in Danville, in the surrounding area. Okay. Basically, what you do is you take it home, and there's the instructions. You plug it in, and you go ahead and you can program it. We do fall here in Danville under the Blacksburg National Weather Service office, so you'd want to make sure it's connected to the Blacksburg office so that you're getting the proper information here for Danville.
And so is that something that is on 24/7 and you receive notices when you just have a warning, or how does that work?
Well, the radio itself is plugged in and on 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Okay.
It does have a battery backup, and one thing I always try to explain to people is make sure you change the battery just like you would with your smoke detectors. Change the time in the spring and the fall. Make sure you change the battery because it does have a battery backup just in case.
Okay.
But you do program it, and it stays on, and then when any type of significant weather would be coming through Danville, it will go off, and you would hear the announcement made by the National Weather Service.
So could that be flooding, tornado, a hurricane, anything?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We would get the flooding, hurricanes, you'd get the tornado watch and warnings. So yes, it will go off whatever the National Weather Service was to put out an alert.
Well, Buster, now you mentioned watches and warnings. Can you tell our viewers the difference between a tornado watch versus a tornado warning?
When we're talking about a watch, and we receive watches a lot from the National Weather Service, that's where the weather system has the potential for tornadoes to be spawned from the system.
Okay.
As far as the warning, that is where a tornado has been spotted, a funnel cloud's been spotted, and it is imminent that you do take shelter because there is a tornado that's been spotted in the area.
So I know if you do have that warning come across the screen, whether it be on Comcast or your NOAA weather radio, it's time to take cover because you have basically minutes before maybe a tornado could touch down.
Yeah, it could be seconds to minutes, and you do need to take shelter. There's different recommendations for that. What they recommend is some type of a safe room. Normally that's going to be somewhere close to the center of the building or that residence that you're in. You want to be away from doors and windows. You want to be as far inside that structure as possible, so that if a tornado does come through, that you have as much protection as possible.
And I know you've talked a lot about a disaster kit and what needs to be included in that, and being prepared for maybe a lengthy stay without electricity, things of that nature. And not so much maybe with a tornado, but with hurricane and flooding. What do we need as a family if you're preparing here in the city of Danville for your disaster kit?
I recommend that all, whether you're a single person or you have a family, have a plan, have a kit in place so that if you do have to evacuate in a very short period of time, that you can take these things with you. It can be just a suitcase that has extra clothing, hygiene, records. You want to make sure, have a copy, it may sound funny, but have a copy of your birth certificate, have a copy of what medications you're taking, your driver's license, because if you lose that, it's very hard if you're in need to get some type of assistance to get that if you don't have the ID and the proper documentation to support that.
And you also mentioned an out-of-state contact number. That's something I never really thought of. But
yeah, they do recommend if you can have an out-of-state contact where if a family gets separated due to an emergency, that it's easier to actually sometimes call long distance to someplace than it is to call two local numbers here within the city or the region. So if you have somebody that you can set up an out-of-state number where you could call, your wife or husband could call, your children could call, and check in. Maybe it's grandma that lives in another state where everybody could call and they can report to her, and she can then put the pieces together and say, okay, this person's at this shelter, this person's at, but everybody is safe where they are.
Because the infrastructure in the entire city could be damaged, as you mentioned, as we've seen in Joplin and in Tuscaloosa, where entire city blocks and towns are devastated, and you don't have much infrastructure left in place.
Right. And a lot of people think right away, well, I have a cell phone, but sometimes the cell phone towers get taken out, and you're the same as if it was wired line.
Right, great information. And I also saw this when I was doing a little research with insurance coverage, because a lot of people's maybe homeowners policies don't cover flood insurance, so that may be something different that you have to purchase.
Right. Well, as far as your insurance, you should always work with your agent, and they should be able to advise you if you're in a floodplain, if the, things like that. That as far as tornadoes, hurricanes, high winds, I'm not really, to be honest, sure what they can do, but there are different types of natural disaster plans that your insurance company can suggest to you, and it's something you can work with your agent.
And I know when we're talking about being prepared. We've got our kit. We've got an evacuation plan in place, hopefully, within our home. But also, you offer some great preparedness classes through the Department of Emergency Services, through your CERT program, and it teaches them a lot of these things that they need to know in case of a natural disaster.
Yes, actually the city has a CERT team. We also have the campus CERT at DCC, and we also now have our first teen CERT, which is in Galileo High School.
Right.
So it's training not just the adults, but we're trying to get now to the college students and the high school students so that they have this training, because more and more families, both parents are working. So sometimes these teenage or high school students, they may be home alone when something like this happens. So we want them to have this education and the training, and we're interested in training as many people as we can. Basically, the training, it's a 24-hour minimum class, and what it does is it trains them on first aid, it trains them on all different types of things with disasters, and primarily how to take care of themselves until the professionals get on scene.
Right. Yeah, and some great programs. I know we've highlighted the campus CERT and also the CERT program with the teen CERT at Galileo School just recently on the City Update. So it's a great program, and I know you all are always offering classes. So you can contact the Department of Emergency Services, whether you're an adult or if you have children that would like to take this program, because it's great information that you can learn in case of a natural disaster happens to hit here in our area. So all the stuff we're really talking today, you learn in that class, and a lot more in depth as well. But great program that's offered here by our Department of Emergency Services. Well, Buster, we're going to have to take a quick break, but when we come back from break, I want to touch on the city's emergency plan, because we, of course, want our viewers to have a plan in place at their home, but of course the city has a plan in place in case of a natural disaster that really gives an indication of where all of our departments need to be, and gives them the protocol that's in place to handle an emergency here in the city of Danville. So I want to touch on that and a whole lot more when we come back from break.
Thank you.
All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back.
These are the children who had no chance. They're known as Brazil's street kids. They wander the streets dying by the thousands from drugs, AIDS, and bullets. Most of them have been abandoned, left to survive on their own. These children needed a place to go. I had to do something. So I brought it up at Rotary. People heard about what we were doing and asked how they could help. Together, we raised funds to give them a home and open the school. They're learning a trade. Now hundreds of kids have a family and a future. They're contributing to the community because Rotary believes in making things better for everyone.
Rotary is making a difference right now.
They have hope.
Rotary gives people an opportunity to help.
Well, welcome back to this week's edition of the City Update. I'm your host, Mark Aaron, Multimedia Design Manager for the City of Danville. My guest this week is our Director of Emergency Services, Buster Brown, and we're talking about ways to stay prepared here in the City of Danville in case a natural disaster happens. Of course, many of you have seen the news coverage over the last few months of tornadoes that have struck all across our country, and we're rolling right into hurricane season. And of course, we may see the remnants of hurricanes coming through the City of Danville with flash flooding and flooding in our area. So we want you to be prepared. And of course, Buster, one thing we always hear from individuals that are struck by these natural disasters is we never thought it would happen here. But of course, as we know, the better you're prepared for these disasters, the better off you'll be. And you gave some great information to our viewers in the beginning of the show, and I think one of the most important was having the NOAA weather radio in your home that will pass that information along to you. And of course, you mentioned that we do have alerts that come across Comcast right here on our River City TV to give them warnings. And then another outlet was the reverse 911 in case we can actually call pockets of our community if we need to alert individuals that they maybe need to evacuate. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how does that work for our reverse 911? Your operators can just select a pocket area of the city. They don't have to call everyone in the city of Danville if need be?
Correct. The way the system is set up, it's a software-based system that's connected through the phone system. And we have the ability either to notify everybody who's in that database. And one important thing that I want viewers to understand is that the database we receive is for hardwire phones that are in your house.
Okay.
If you have a cell phone, you actually have to contact emergency services and give us your information so that we then can put it into the system. We do not get a database from the wireless carriers.
Okay.
So if somebody has a wireless phone that they would like to be put into the reverse 911, they could definitely call emergency services. We can get that taken care of for them.
Great information. Well, that's a great system to have in place.
Right. So basically what happens is if we do have a situation, whether it's man-made or natural disaster, and there's a request for the reverse 911, the telecommunicator can go in and they can either do a mass call where it would call everybody within the database, or we can do a section and we can actually take, and it can be either a 1 mile radius, quarter-mile radius, it can be all different shapes. We can draw it down different streets, so it's very technical advanced, and we could everything within that line or circle then would populate every phone number that we have within there, and that's the numbers that would be called with the message.
Now, Buster, do you have an incident recently where we've had to implement the reverse 911 system?
Yeah, just approximately a week and a half ago, we had the situation in Blue Park where the gas line was hit. And the telecommunicator was able to go in and map out the residents that needed to be notified to be evacuated. It turned out that they only had to be removed from their house for a short period of time once the fire department got there and Public Works and handled the situation. But it worked out great because it gets the information out to those folks, and it's time consuming if you have to have responders or police officers go door to door knocking on doors. So this works out really well because it notifies them right away, and they can get their belongings and leave and be sent to either a shelter, or they can go stay with loved ones or friends.
Now, Buster, what number would actually show up on our caller ID? Because I know our viewers at home, many of us are leery of answering digits that they're not familiar with. And what number would actually show up if a reverse 911 was called? And is it an automated message that they'll receive?
Well, what they receive is the phone number that it would show is one of the bank of numbers that are in emergency services. Okay. So it could be a multiple number, set of numbers, 7-digit numbers that would show up that it's coming through from the city. As far as the recording itself, there's 2 ways of doing it. You can either use the automated system within the computer, and you can type in the message, and then the computer would generate that, but it's more of a electronical voice that the person's going to hear.
Okay.
Or the telecommunicator can record the message themselves. And for the most part, most of my individuals in emergency services, they're going to do the recording. It's a little bit quicker to do, especially if it's time sensitive, to get that message out.
Very good. Well, that's some great information for our viewers, and great to know that we have that in place here in the city of Danville. If we have to use it in any type of natural disaster, that we can notify our citizens really quickly to let them know that they need to evacuate if need be. Now, Buster, we've talked about our viewers preparing for a natural disaster, having a plan in place at their home, but the city also has an emergency plan, and I know we talked about this just about 4 or 5 months ago where we updated the city's plan. We did a couple of shows here on the City Update about that, but what all is entailed in that plan, and what kind of outline does that give our departments when it comes to what they need to do during a disaster?
The emergency operation plan, we just adopted the new plan. It's an updated version. It's through the Virginia Department of Emergency Management and FEMA. It meets their guidelines and baseline. The new plan is actually set up under the ESF programs so that each entity within the city has their roles and responsibilities within the plan. So it could be where transportation has their role within the emergency operation plan, to Public Works, to police, fire, emergency services, right up to the city attorney and city manager's office of what role they will have in these types of emergencies.
And this is something that we update periodically?
Yes, it needs to be updated every 5 years.
Okay.
And we just got done updating it, so we're good now for the next 4. We'll start working on it again in about 3.5 to 4 years, because it takes about a year and a half to make the changes that need to be made.
And I know you get all the departments to directors together, and we do like a mock scenario, and we do a lot of training for this.
Yeah, just like after we adopted the new EOP, we actually had a tabletop drill where the consultant who came that helped write the EOP for us came in and actually did a tabletop drill in the EOC and brought all the different departments together and all the role players, and we ran a drill within the EOC.
And I know within that plan, we have emergency shelters here in the city of Danville. That's something I wanted to touch on briefly, that our viewers can be rest assured know that there are places put in place in this plan for them to go to if need be during a disaster.
Yes, and it would depend on the situation. It would depend on what the disaster is, what shelters would be utilized. Right now we have an agreement with the city school system, and we have George Washington, we have the 3 middle schools, Gibson, Bonner, and Westwood, and then we have 2 elementary schools, Taylor and Schoolfield, that are set up. We actually had the Red Cross come in and they do a walkthrough to make sure that everything is set up and that the school would be adequate to use as a shelter. And right now we have those locations, and we're always looking for other locations too, because again, we don't know what type of situation is going to be, and possibly 1, 2, maybe all of those facilities would not be available. So then we have to go to Plan B.
And you mentioned the Red Cross. They would be assisting us in manning those during a disaster. And it's great for our citizens to know we're asking them to formulate a plan. It's great to know the city has one in place in case that we need it. Buster, we've got about 5 minutes left on today's show, and there's a couple of more topics I want to touch on briefly before I let you go. And one of those is heat. And we're reaching temperatures close to triple digits here in the city of Danville this week as of this filming. And I know I just want to give some tips out there to our viewers if they're going to be working outside. What do they need, precautions do they need to take to stay cool during the summer months?
Well, first and foremost, we need to make sure that they're aware of the elements, okay? If we have children, make sure that they're dressed appropriately and make sure that they're taking the breaks and they're taking in the fluids, because a lot of times kids get out there and they just keep playing and they don't realize what the outcome could be. As far as the adults need to make sure if they can, do what they need to outside, either in the early morning hours if they have the ability to do that, or in the evenings. And then try not to do all that hard labor in the middle of the afternoon when the heat index is very high. Dress appropriately. One of the problems that we run into is people sometimes overdress. Wear light colored clothes, lightweight clothes. Make sure you take in plenty of fluids. Believe it or not, alcohol is not something that's good to drink with the heat, and that can actually escalate going into heat emergencies. But stay cool. If you feel yourself where you're getting overheated, get to a cool place. Get into a shaded area, go into a residence, get it somewhere where you can cool down. And if you need to, if you feel still that you're not feeling well, by all means, if it's an emergency, call 911. We will send the appropriate agencies, and we will get you taken care of.
And I know signs and symptoms of maybe a heat stroke or an illness that is coming on. What do you need to look for in the case of emergency if you have a loved one that is experiencing something of that nature?
They'll get very reddish in color. They'll actually stop perfusing. They'll stop sweating. Their glands actually will start to shut down. And they'll also start getting muscle cramps. Again, they could get dizzy, fatigue, all these different things that will affect them. And it is a true emergency. Unfortunately, there's people across the United States that die of this every year in the United States.
Great. Well, some great information there, and there's always a list of information online. Emergency Services Department has that listed as well if you'd like more information on ways to stay cool here during the summer months, because of course it does get hot and humid here in the city of Danville during the summer months here. Lester, we've got a couple minutes left, and I want to touch on 2 things briefly because I want to have you back on a little further down the road to discuss these. But when we're talking about being prepared, I know the American Heart Association just released some modifications to CPR. And I know part of being prepared is taking a CPR class, and we talked about your CERT program. You get CPR through that, but they did change some things with CPR.
The American Heart Association just recently released their 2010 guidelines. And with those new guidelines, there has been some significant changes. The big change would be is that originally you always started out with giving breaths. So you did your 2 breaths on 1 person CPR and 30 compressions. Well, now it's being reversed, where you're going to start out with compressions before you do breaths. So it is important, but I want everybody to understand that if you've taken CPR and your card has an expiration date of sometime in 2011, early 2012, please understand that card's still valid. But when you go to recert, then you'll get trained in the new standards.
Great, very good information. And lastly, we've got a new 911 phone system that's going to be going into place soon, and I know I'm going to bring you back on to discuss this in more detail, take our viewers down to the 911 center when it's finally in place, but just a brief overview of this new system and how it's going to benefit our citizens.
How it's going to benefit the citizens in the city of Danville is it's with the same vendor that we currently have, and it's going to be an upgrade to today's technology. And what it is it's going to be a base for us to work with and grow through the next generation 911. Immediately, we're not going to have the capabilities to receive text messages, phone pictures, phone videos, but that is what we're migrating to with this system. And this is basically the base, and then we're going to be adding the additional software programs and devices so that we can start receiving that, hopefully in the near future.
Great. Well, as I mentioned, we'll have Buster back on shortly when that 911 system is put into place. We'll take you down to our 911 center and give you an up-close look at the new software package. Look forward to that. Buster, we really appreciate you taking the time to join us today and giving us all this great information as we head into the summer months, and of course also being prepared when it comes to tornadoes and the remnants of hurricanes here in the city of Danville. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
And thank you at home for watching. And if you would like more information about anything we've discussed on today's show, feel free to call our Department of Emergency Services at 799-6535 or log on to our website, danville-va.gov, and they've got a lot of great information when it comes to disaster kits and what needs to be included. And also some great information that Buster talked about today with the reverse 911 system that we use here in the city of Danville to notify our citizens that maybe they need to be evacuated from their home. If you have a cell phone number that you would like to be included, feel free to call the department and get that included, because it does only include hardwired phone lines in that system unless you notify them to access your cell phone number onto that system. So a lot of great information on today's show. Again, contact them if you would like more information on anything we've discussed today. So until next week, have a great day.